Welcome to this week's episode of the Life Alchemy podcast. And this week we're going to be talking about forgiveness. Slightly biased because it's my topic this week, but this is the one that I'm really looking forward to because, the reason I'm excited is because I see forgiveness, and obviously the rest of the panel can chip in at any time. I see forgiveness as freedom. I don't see it as letting someone off the hook. I don't see it as giving them an excuse to do something to you. I see it as you setting yourself free from it. So, loads of questions to ask. Have you been wronged? We want some stories, strategies, any serenity around forgiveness today. So, I'm going to throw it out there. Do you forgive easily? Have you been wronged? Let's do it.
I think this is a good question because I think in the past, let's be really honest. I'd like to think I forgive easily, but if I'm really honest, there's been a long period of time where I don't. I used to describe myself as an elephant, elephants never forget. I'd say, oh yeah, I'll forgive you, but I'll never forget. And I realised that that's not really forgiveness, is it?
Yeah.
So I think, I don't know what there was something about me, I think, especially when I was younger, that if I felt wronged or if one of my core values had been violated, I wouldn't let it go. I know I wouldn't let it go. And you might think I've let it go, but I haven't. And I think after a while, I think you realise that the only person that actually is really being affected by that is yourself. And I think after a period of time, the best way I started to teach myself to forgive, which I think is a bit of a constant thing, because I still catch myself now, actually. There's people in my life where they've said something. I'll give you an example. I won't name the person just in case they listen. So there was a time where I popped in at somebody unannounced, and I sort of expected to be welcomed with open arms. Yeah, come in. It was during now I'm going to give it all away. It was during the time of the pandemic. So it was obviously when I shouldn't be going to their house, and they were obviously very careful. But anyway, people are thinking, yeah, well, you shouldn't be forgiven. But anyway, so when I went in, I've really got the feeling that I got the most frosty welcome. Actually, I didn't get a welcome. That was a problem. And so after that, I think I held on to the fact that, well, I'd never make anybody feel unwelcome in my house. And that person then 2 weeks later turned up to my house unannounced. So I didn't say anything. Anyway, long story short, I think the only way I can teach myself to forgive, or continuously teach myself or remind myself to forgive, is think about what was that person going through, or what hurt were they experiencing, or what pain have they experienced in order for them to react the way they did. And also what did I do to create that reaction? Because it's not always all about them and not about me. What did I do? Is it, and when I thought about it like that, I suddenly came up with a very different perspective. I thought about this individual thinking, he wasn't not making me welcome. That person has high levels of anxiety around the virus and around meeting people, around protecting his safety, work and all that kind of stuff. And I didn't really think about that. So I think that's it for me. I think it's about asking myself, what have I done and what part have I got to play in it? And secondly, is it possible that person's not just being mean, but they're reacting from a place of pain or discomfort or something? And how can I better understand that?
Do you think that ego stops you from forgetting? Do you think it's more ego?
Yeah, massively. Massively. And I've learned, I've learned, I'm constantly learning, trying to keep my ego in check, because it's always there. There are various levels of presence, shall we say. But definitely, I could hear myself, oh, how dare he do that to me? I would, I should be welcomed. And when I hear it, I'm like, oh my God, who do I think I am? Like, somebody very important. I'm not. But I think if you can get used to hearing that voice, you can get used to trying to stop your, catch yourself basically. And if you can catch yourself, I think you can change your perspective or your thoughts, and then create a different reality.
I love that strategy, Hema, of just stepping across the other side and going, what are they going through? Not what am I going through?
Yeah.
Because it stops that ego conversation, doesn't it? It's a great story, that. Yeah. Anyone else got any stories or any forgiveness in them?
Yeah,
at all.
God, lots of forgiving and forgetting. And I think there's a difference between forgiving someone and like forgetting it. So forgiving someone doesn't necessarily mean that your relationship is gonna be, you know, mended or anything like that. But it's like, I think it's more about forgiving so that you can release your own pain and you can heal and you can move on. And I totally agree with what Hema said with regards to sort of, I think one thing is we will never know. Sometimes we will never know why someone does something. We can just do our best to kind of let go and know that they have obviously gone through some pain, because hurt people. There's so much around it, isn't it? There could be someone could have done something to hurt you because they're in a lot of pain, or the pain is totally coming from you and that other person had no intention to hurt you, but maybe you've taken something personally, and that's to do with your own pain from your own past or beliefs or whatever. And I had like a personal thing, which, say, a parent, like from a young age right up until very recently, had lots of like abandonment issues where someone hadn't shown up, they weren't there in the role that you would expect that they should be, and then I'd made a reconnection with parts of the family, and then I heard the other side of all these things that, so obviously the last connection I had, well, I was probably like 2 or 5 or whatever, and as I grew up, I built this picture as to like what this person did to me and how I couldn't forgive it and how could someone do that, and you know, etc., etc. And it wasn't until like very recently, in like the last 2 or 3 years, that I've kind of reconnected with that part of the family, and I'd heard about all this stuff that person had gone through and what they had, you know, during that period and, you know, their life before. And I felt so, and now I have a sense of like empathy, and I feel, I don't feel any anger, I don't feel any hurt or anything anymore, because I think, wow, like that story that I told myself all those years was actually not true. That was just a story I had created in my head. And I don't even feel like there is a need for forgiveness actually for that person, because I just feel that they're another human. They've got their own journey, and they've done things they've acted or behaved because of their own pain. And I feel blessed that actually, I feel really fortunate that I didn't have that in my life, you know, whereas before I just had like abandonment issues. And now with all the information that I have now, I feel really fortunate. So it's funny, isn't it? Like something that belief that your story that you can build up your whole life. And now what I'm thought, so by the time I was 40, that's 40 years, 35, 40 years of this story. That wasn't true. So yeah, that I found that really powerful. And I think ever since then, it's really made me think what Hema was saying, you know, that you don't know what someone else is going through. And then just remembering not to take anything personally, and thinking, well, that's their thing, you know. And I know it sounds really simple when people go hurt people, but it is true. And thinking, is it them hurting you, or you're perceiving that's that person hurting you, or are you actually hurting yourself because of your own pain? You know?
I think there's a clear message there. I'm hearing it lovely, loud and clear. Is challenge what you think you already know. You know, and just understand. I think that they're the foundations of forgiveness, just understanding, like Hema said, and then just listening with a different ear and a different rhetoric. That's so important. Ros, have you got anything to add?
Well, I think that's all really, brilliant. It's a kind of, I always get people to ask themselves a question of what else could this mean? And I suppose that's really what you're talking about, aren't you? And I've written a lot about forgiveness, and when I was in charity PR and marketing, and I spent a lot of time in Africa and India, I mean, there's a story, and it's either Rwanda or Uganda, I can't remember, but I could double check. Anyway, it's about where literally whole villages literally killed each other, and they had so many people, I think it probably was Uganda, it was one of the two, that they couldn't keep them interned, and they were really worried that if they let people out of the jails, all the tribal violence would kick off again, because literally neighbors had killed neighbors and they had to all return to their villages. And it was like, how are we going to do this? And so they introduced this policy of radical forgiveness. It's actually a thing if you Google it. Wow. And people literally sat down with people who'd killed their entire families under, I think there's a tree, it's called something like the Mvulu tree. And it's like the place where the tribal people come together, and they took it out and they kind of let it go. And it was the only way they could continue as a nation. So it was at a very high level of, containership, if you like. And I always thought about that. And then I had a client who was a very deeply Christian guy, and he told me about some very terrible things that happened in his childhood. Oh, I've forgiven my parents, because I'm Christian. And then under hypnosis, about 10 minutes in, he was like, I haven't effing forgiven you. And he was literally screaming it under hypnosis. And so he hadn't, and the hurt was still there. He thought he should because it was the right thing to do. And so what I'm saying is they're probably the bookends, aren't they, in a way? That it's amazing if you can do it. But I think sometimes at a deep, deep level, the hurt is so deep because it's really been about a rules violation. And even if you can walk in that other person's shoes and go, oh, well, they did this because, and I get that, I really do. And I think for probably 80% of our daily hurts, that's an amazing thing to do. But sometimes things are just plain wrong.
Yeah.
And I always say I'm a therapist, not a priest. And there are some things I hear on a daily basis almost, which, in my own head, I'm like, whoa. I mean, again, without clearly naming anybody, a very big example of what I'm talking about is I had a woman who'd been gang raped. I mean, for a weekend, held captive in a house when she was a teenager. And years later, it had come to haunt her. But what haunted her wasn't so much the trauma of what had happened, and boy, it was appalling. It was that the way that they let her go was because they brought another girl in and she had to hold her down. And that was the deal. That was the deal that was on the table the whole weekend. If you do that, it was like pass the parcel. We bring the next one in, you can go. And so what was killing her all those years later was the guilt about what she'd done, to the other girl, if you like. But I was able to contextualize it in the hypnosis session about she had no choice. And we did a kind of a healing thing where she paid it forward to this person. But that nearly brought her to suicide, that guilt. And
surprised.
So anyway, lighter things. What am I saying? I'm saying I agree with you. I think what else could this mean? Walk in their shoes, put it into context. But sometimes that hurt, it's just from a place of you've been sinned, if you like, in a biblical sense. And so the only thing you can do is let it go for your own sake.
Agreed. I think there's two choices here. Do you want to move forward with hurt, or do you want to move forward with peace? And I think that's a gift back to your own heart, isn't it? Was it the last post I put up got a load of traction on LinkedIn, and it was, don't bleed on the people who didn't cut you. Ooh. And that was the kind of line that I went with. And it was what happens after the hurt. That's what I was really getting at is, people don't die of the snake bite, they die of the poison that's left behind, the venom that's left behind. It goes around the system. And it's about identifying, where is that poison going? Where is it spreading to? Yeah. Because how many times are you once bitten, twice shy? And you recoil back and you recoil back and you recoil back until eventually we've got no confidence, and people go, I've got no confidence. Well, let's have a little look at where the starting point was. Is there any moments in your life where you have been once bitten, twice shy, or still, even now, do you have those moments? I have them in business. I know I had a business deal that went really south when I first came out of international swimming. I plowed all my life savings into this deal, and this guy just 6 weeks later took our life savings and did what he wanted with it. And for years, for a good 3 years, I was so angry at him, and everywhere I went, I was just telling people how bad he was, until one day I realized it was me who did it. I was the one who did it. If I wasn't the one stinking of vulnerability, he wouldn't have picked on us. And once I took responsibility for it, it just stopped. Literally overnight, it stopped. The pain stopped, the anger stopped, everything stopped. And I wouldn't say I was at peace straight away, but it allowed me to open doors again that I just kept slamming shut because I didn't want to get hurt again like that. And I didn't want to be foolish again, but that wasn't the right way. So yeah, has there been any moments in your life where you kind of regret that lack of forgiveness has taken over another part of your life?
I think when you mentioned business, I think it's interesting, isn't it? Because when you apply kind of a different lens, whether it's your livelihood, your money, the hard work, there's one thing when you've got an issue with, like Rosa said, your daily percent, like 80% of your daily interactions, you know, you can feel wronged by somebody. And I don't mean the kind of wrong that, you know, like that you shared, Ros, with that lady, because that's
well, it's unforgivable.
It really is.
I mean, it is, to be honest. It was evil.
Yeah. And I always find it hard to believe those things happen in the world, because I like to think that people are inherently good. And like whenever I hear stories like that, or you see something, it really affects me, because I kind of think there's always good in people, and maybe there is, but anyway, that's another podcast.
No, there are, and I'm sorry to have brought it all down. I didn't mean to.
Not at all. Actually,
I fundamentally believe most people are good. I really do.
Yeah. But I was just saying, Chris, you mentioned business, and I was just thinking back, like, what's the difference between when I have felt wronged by people in my personal life versus people in like the workplace or in a business environment? And I can't quite put my finger on it, but I'm thinking about a couple of examples where I've had some interactions that have gotten not as I'd like them to. So like I've had a business partner relationship for me that turned sour, if I'm honest. It didn't work out very well. And a couple of other, and just one other relationship which started off really well, but kind of we didn't evolve together. And when I look back at like, what is it in there? I think sometimes they teach you lessons about yourself. You know, you said, you know, if I was thinking of vulnerability, it was a really interesting way to say it. But I kind of thought, you know, in the business partnering relationship, I think I wasn't very, I hadn't set my own boundaries, if I'm really honest. Like I hadn't set my boundaries. I wasn't clear about what I expected from a business partner. The lines got blurred. And then as an outcome, our relationship was not what it needed to be to run a business effectively together. So I think there is also something when it's just having another lens, especially when it comes to like your, you know, the work and your purpose and what you're doing every day, trying to make a difference to other people and your own life. I think just holding up that mirror a little bit about like what this interaction, if it starts to feel sour or difficult or there's some resentment there, you know, what lesson is it showing me? And what could I learn? And what, you know, like, what's it teaching me? Because I genuinely believe until you've resolved that, until that lesson is resolved or you've understood the lesson and you've genuinely learned from it, it will keep showing up in different formats. And I think sometimes actually, if you look back at some of the interactions, I mean, whether it's personal or whether it's in that sort of organizational or workplace business environment, I wonder if there is a synergy with the types of interactions or troubles that you get.
Yeah, agreed.
So that's what I think. But once you learn them and you kind of pick on, and you think, actually, for me, no, a business relationship is a business relationship, and these are the things I need, even if they feel a bit icky. They don't need to feel icky. Why do they feel icky? And all that kind of stuff. I think once you resolve it, you learn from it. You don't make it again, or you're much more aware of it.
I love that. I love that. And I'm you know what, I'm scribbling away and making notes all the time. And for me, that ultimate forgiveness is saying thank you for the experience, isn't it? That's the ultimate forgiveness, is to get to the point where you go, thank you for helping me see something I couldn't see before. So that for me would be what I've learned from this is that's my one liner that I'm going to go away with. That's my who to follow or what to follow. So has anybody else got any thoughts on who to follow, what to follow? What things have helped you through forgiveness? What you're going to take away from the podcast?
There's a a lovely, I don't know if I mentioned it before or not, so sorry if I'm repeating myself, but there's a really lovely Hawaiian prayer, and I really struggle to say the name.
Was that Hippopono?
Po-po-po-po.
Yes, that one. Yeah.
That one.
yeah, that's great, isn't it? Yeah.
I can never say it. That one. So it's a really beautiful, very short, simple prayer, and it's basically what we were talking about. It's a forgiveness prayer, but I use it to forgive myself in all situations, like even if I'm angry with someone else. So it's, I'm sorry, please forgive me, thank you, I love you. So it basically covers everything that we've said. So thank you for the lessons that you taught me. I'm sorry, please forgive me. But when I use it, I'm forgiving myself, because I'm thinking, well, what part have I played in it, and what have I let myself down on? What boundaries have I not set, or whatever it is. And I love you. So that unconditional, whatever's happened, there's that love is always there. That's the one thing, which I think is really nice to share.
Love that. Thank you. Ros?
Well, yeah, just very briefly, because I know we're getting towards the hour. I had a really bad business experience in my PR company where I actually had to take 2 former members of staff to court. I think you and I discussed and shared stories when we first met each other, Chris, didn't we? And that, I just took decades to forgive them. I really did. I'm gonna fess up. It was like, it was still sort of there. And I think when I contextualized it in a bigger picture of karma, really, I think is the best way to put it, because I do have a very interesting spirituality that ranges from kind of traditional Christian right through to many other things. I've sort of cobbled together what works for me. And yeah, I think that feeling of perhaps that's their lesson, and also perhaps that's my lesson, for me takes a lot of that sting and that energy away from it. And I discovered years ago Marianne Williamson, and she has a book called A Return to Love, but she also has a book called Illuminata, A Return to Prayer, and they are prayers, and she does talk about God, but you can change it to spirit or whatever you want. And I was looking for it behind me, because literally in my darkest days, I think when I came through the cancer, the divorce, a whole bunch of stuff, that book was literally my, because a lot of her prayers, if you like, prayers are about letting go and forgiveness and moving on and being kind to yourself. That's basically the essence of what she's about.
Brilliant. That's awesome. I'm going to go and searching for some of this. Hema, last words?
Yeah, last thing I say, there's a book called Loving What Is. I think we mentioned it before actually on one of these podcasts, by Byron Katie. And in there she has I think it's called Judge Thy Neighbor worksheet. So, those experiences when we say we sort of feel wronged by someone and we're angry with somebody and we're holding on to something, there's a very practical way that she gets you to explore that. And in brief, it's almost like you notice what's gone on, you write it down, you question it, and then you turn it around to see if a completely turned around perspective could possibly be more true than the story that you're telling yourself. So have a look. I think that's a really easy, practical way of just taking that experience or that bit that you feel angry about and like just digging around with it. I've done it before. I've used it to work through some stuff, and it's really interesting to see the story that I genuinely believed. If I turn the story around completely, as in like I wronged the other person versus they wronged me, actually, it could have held true. What
I do to them to make them show up like this?
Yeah, exactly.
Good question.
Yeah.
That's a good question. So that kind of wraps up our podcast for this week on forgiveness. I've loved this discussion. I think we could go on and on and on, especially with the stories and strategies, and there's so much to take away from saying thank you for the experience, stepping across the other side and listening and understanding what the other person's going through, taking the ego state out of it, challenging what you already know. There's so much in there. Next week's podcast is going to be about muting the inner voice, shutting that kind of internal critic up, aptly named Itty Bitty Shitty Committee. Thank you for that, Ros. This is going to be yours next week. So it's a goodbye from me.
Bye from me.
Goodbye from me.
Bye from me.